I'm Sean Carney. I'm a Vice-Chancellor's Professorial Fellow at Monash University, and I'm here to have a talk with a fellow Professorial Fellow, John Fundle, one of our most distinguished scientists and medical researchers over a very long time. So it's a great honour to be able to talk to you, John, and learn something about your life, or hopefully more than just something, hopefully a lot about your approach to your study and your sort of ongoing success and involvement in so many important things.
Today's medical students are infinitely more competent than those of 60 years ago. I was in the last intake into medicine at Melbourne University where there was no quota. There was anybody who had physics or chemistry, a branch of maths, English and one other subject. And English could be a compensatory pass, for God's sake, could go into the medical school. In the intake I was in, which was 200 people, there were 30-something women, and now they're probably a slight majority. That's a big change. Much is said of the sort of, God professors, God doctors and so on. There was a bit of that, but not a lot of that back in the late 50s, early 60s, I have to say. And that I notice, in a sense, from the outside now, not in practice, etc., etc. There's still a fair bit of that about. I'm not sure that's changed very much. It's, I think, much more the case in surgery than it is in the medical side of things, because surgery attracts a certain personality type. I mean, there's very good data on that. And, pediatrics, obstetrics and gynae, the various arms of medicine are much more open to women. I mean, that's an obvious difference between medicine and surgery now. Surgery is open, but still a lot of women find it very difficult in surgery. I recently had a very small heart attack, and I was superbly treated at Box Hill Hospital by one of the 2 out of 100 interventional cardiologists who's a woman. This is in 2020. I've never really much thought about leadership. It just sort of happened. The Williamson Foundation, which now has another name, Stella Clark, interviewed me for the Williamson Foundation and said, well, plot out this leadership you've been on about. And I thought, oh, I never really thought of it. I mean, it just sort of happens. And if you're approachable, cheery, useful, people think, well, you'll be all right. Then, you wind up as president of the Students' Club or Obesity Australia or the International Society of Endocrinology. You just wind up being landed with it. And that's great. I love it. Yeah. Which is probably one of the reasons why people say, well, he actually does love it, so he might do a reasonable job. "50 years ago, by and large, the only truly postdoctoral place in Australia, and people came from Queensland and Western Australia and so on to do postdocs, was the Hall Institute. I mean, it was supreme. And I know friends who are back in Queensland, back in Western Australia, but whose PhDs or postdocs were at the Hall Institute. Things have changed enormously. The range of possibilities here to do terrific things is very, very much better. That said, we bat above our weight, but we still contribute only about 3% of the world's medical research. Half of it comes from America. Now, America's, I had a terrific time in San Francisco. I learned a lot, met a lot of friends, some of whom, I'm still in contact with, etc. And then Paris for a year was terrific too. The same thing. And you get two things. I mean, you get a much wider sort of purview, a much wider purchase on what it's like to be French or what it's like to be American. That's important. And secondly, you get to meet a lot of people that you work with and stay in contact with. And that's important. I mean, we're a large continent with a small population at the end of the world, apart from New Zealand in a sense. And the world's pretty big out there. So I would very much suggest to people that if they do a PhD here, or if they get their medical degree and are particularly interested in some aspect, then, and they want to go to England and, you know, be a psychiatrist and get all their qualifications in, you know, at the Maudsley and wherever, then do so. Do so. And it's not just for medicine. I mean, I would recommend most people who are university graduates seeing what it's like in the rest of the world. In a sense, I've still got an American network. And I've got a British network and a German network and an Italian network and a French network and a Japanese network. And these are all important. And I think they're important to the people at the other end of the network too. You know, they can say, look, I've got an issue with this, or what do you reckon about that? Or my daughter's coming to Melbourne, can she come and see? You know, this sort of stuff. And my kids, who are now no longer kids, God help us, Anna will be 54 before the end of the year. You know, they're now citizens of the world. You know, they went to school in San Francisco, they went to school in France, they went to the same school with 4 years difference in France. They all speak very good French, 2 of them speak very good German. I've been fortunate in that way too. Probably the most important paper I published, or my group published, was in 1989. It's a long time ago. And for the first time, it showed that the reason that this hormone, aldosterone, can act as it does to retain sodium and get rid of potassium in the kidney tubule. And it does it at extraordinarily low concentrations, you know, 1,000th of those of the glucocorticoid hormone, cortisol, is because in those cells where it happens in the kidney, there are high levels, it's very highly expressed, high levels of an enzyme that turns cortisol, which has the same ability to sit in the receptor and, if unchecked, to activate the receptor, turns it into cortisone, which it doesn't. It was a real breakthrough. I think I'm almost certain that is my most highly cited paper. You know, more than well over 1,000, somehow, you know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 times. The best or the equivalent is yet to come with primary aldosteronism. I don't have a lab, I don't have students, I don't have postdocs. But this year, I've already written 4 editorial commentaries on some of these papers that are starting to come through with data. And I think if we can get that moving, it's actually a 30-year proposal. It's a proposal to take this from the endocrinologists, hypertension people, whatever, and actually get the general practitioners in the States, the primary care practitioners. When somebody comes in and has a checkup and they say, look, your blood pressure's up. Now, you know, how much salt you're eating and how much stress you're under and so on. Don't start putting them on medication. But of course, it'll take 30 years before all the people coming in with hypertension get properly fixed up. Because if you're already on antihypertensives, it makes it a more difficult thing to see whether or not you've also got this additional problem of primary aldosteronism. So I think that will be a really important contribution if we can make that work. What it now looks like is somewhere between 30 and 80% of all people with elevated blood pressure have got a component of too much aldosterone for their hypertension. And that's really an extraordinary thing in terms of risk factors. Morbidity, mortality, between 3 and 4 times higher risk on top of the risks of hypertension. So if I can get that running over the next 5 years and accepted, I don't know what I'll do then, but I'll die happy.